Hey everyone, and welcome to my full in-depth guide to Lissandra. Recently, I've been having a ton of success with Lissandra, especially in the road to rank 1, and I think she's very broken right now, so before she gets nerfed, it's worth abusing for sure. And by the end of this video, you should have a really good idea of how to do so. Let's begin by talking about Lissandra's identity. So traditionally, Lissandra has been more of a counterpick champion. It's been something that is very good with ganking junglers. You know, it's got great mid-jungle 2v2, a lot of CC, but it's kind of been held back by having a weaker laning phase. It sort of struggles against a lot of other mages. And again, it's been kind of that counterpick to either melee mids or to heavy engage comps, or maybe even to kind of follow up on other engage from your team, right? Like if you have something like a Jarvan or a Kai'Sa that wants to go in, you could pick Lissandra and play around that. Lissandra at the moment, though, after receiving lots and lots of buffs, is kind of just good at everything. While she still does struggle with mages, and you know, I'll talk about at the end of the video, there are still some matchups you would like to avoid. She has become a very strong blind pick, and she's a really nice champ to have in your champion pool at the moment because she deals with so many things that are normally kind of a struggle for mid laners. For example, she provides, you know, a very safe platform to play from if you're against, you know, ganking jungler and ganking support, ganks it up mid. She can deal with that all really well while still scaling. You know, a lot of the time you kind of have to make the choice of, yeah, I'm going to be safe, but then I'm just going to be useless. I'm not actually going to have impact. But Lissandra can do that. She can allow you to survive these sorts of combos. Something like a LeBlanc, Jarvan, Rel, for example, that pretty much any other mid laner would have an awful time playing against. Lissandra deals with that perfectly. On top of that, if you find you really struggle with melee mids or assassin mids, Lissandra is a way to deal with them that honestly doesn't require too much investment. While there is a reasonable skill cap to Lissandra, she's relatively easy to pick up as well. And of course, by the end of this, you'll be the best Lissandra in the world anyway. Lissandra has a lot of viable keystones, which can definitely be overwhelming at first, but I'll simplify them down for you. So my recommendation, if you're new to Lissandra, or if you're relatively low elo, is to start with this Electrocute page here. So you take Electrocute. Electrocute is a good keystone to kind of just like take and forget about it. It's always going to have at least some value. I do think it's not as great after the nerfs, but it's still solid. It gives you a lot of burst, gives you a lot of skirmishing potential. On top of that, a lot of the minor runes here are really good for Lissandra. So Taste of Blood can kind of help you in some of the more difficult lanes, especially if you're not avoiding as much damage as you should. Eyeball is really good for snowballing. If you are getting a lot of kills, again, low elo games, if there's a lot of action going on, you can get this stacked up really fast. Ultimate Hunter, I think, is very useful for people that are new to Lissandra as well. So Lissandra is more difficult to play without ult for sure. Like, you can find value, but you have to be much more careful, much more precise. Whereas, you know, like, again, if you're fighting a lot, if you're not too good at playing around like your ult cooldown, if you waste it sometimes, if you fight too much without it, then Ultimate Hunter is going to help with that a lot. And then Mana Flow, the champ does have some mana flow or some mana problems early, so I would recommend taking that. And of course, Transcendence just helps you with the team fights. So I would say overall, this is the easiest page to play, and it's probably the one you need to think about the least. So again, if you're new to Lissandra, I'd recommend taking this one. Now, if you're a bit higher level Lissandra, you're getting a bit more comfortable with it, and you still want to play a burst page, I would recommend playing the Inspiration Tree instead. So I'd actually just swap. I would take First Strike instead. And then here, you can either take Magic Boots or Perfect Timing, and it depends what you're going to build. And also a little bit depends on your matchup. So Magic Boots, obviously they help you accelerate towards your first item. But the problem is if you have no boots, it can make playing skill shot matchups pretty hard. It can also make roaming up and down the river pretty hard, which is like a lot of what Lissandra wants to do. So I think, unless you're sure that you're not going to need the boots early, you should probably take Perfect Timing. And that also helps you if you're going to end up building a Zhonya's. Coming down here, I would just recommend taking Minion Demat. I think Minion Demat is really good on Lissandra. I would recommend just using it on one of each type of creep. So one on melees, one on cannon, one on range. And that's just going to help you push the wave in general. And of course, Cosmic is one of the best runes in the game right now. The Summoner cooldown is really nice for both Flash and TP, especially if you're using them really well. So again, if you still wanted to play a burstier page in higher elos, I would recommend this one. Now, personally, I think the Sorcery Inspiration page is the best one to take on Lissandra. So first off, you have to kind of choose your keystone. So most games, I would like to go Phase Rush on Lissandra. This is because it's really good in the current meta. It's good against all the ganking junglers and ganking supports. It can be really nice in some matchups, especially melees, just to kite them out or dodge their skill shots. It can also allow you sometimes to save cooldowns in fights. You know, you can like proc Phase Rush and walk in when you might need to kind of flash then to create the distance instead or something like that. So it has a lot of cases, and there's a lot of times where it will help you save cooldowns going out as well. You know, you don't have to flash out, you don't have to E out or something like that. You can also go Airy. So Airy is really good for lane. Obviously, it can make the difference in some range versus range matchups. It also is very good against melees, right? Like you can poke them out really hard. So the way I normally choose the keystone is I look at the enemy, jungle, and support, and I kind of think like how much do I really need phase rush to survive? So an extreme example would be, if you're playing Lissandra and the enemy team has like Briar and Rel, that's looking like a really, really good phase rush game, right? If they had something that can't really gank mid at all, like let's say you reverse like Kayn jungle and like Zyra support or something, something that's going to play just for 2v2 bot lane, in that case you can look to take Airy and then just punish your lane as hard as possible. But if you're not sure, I like to default to phase rush. Now, of course, we take the mana flow. Here, you have a choice to make. Do we want absolute focus for the laning phase? So it's good for lane. It's good for pushing the wave, which is very, very important on Lissandra. Like the extra wave clip coming from absolute and what is this called? Minion demat. This adds up to a lot of extra push over the wave. And if your opponent doesn't have these, it can actually be a pretty significant advantage. Now, if you don't want this, I would recommend going Transcendence. It is better for scaling, and it's really nice, I think, in skirmishes. For the bottom row, I mean, your only real choices are between Scorch and Gathering Storm now that Water Walking has been pretty hard nerfed. I would recommend going Scorch. I think the extra damage in the laning phase does go a long way, and not just defensively. Like, sometimes being able to trade back better is important too, because if you need to play a defensive lane, it can be good to, like, be chunking your opponent out at the same time, right? Like, not often are you allowed to play defensive by just AFKing. So I think having extra trading power is good. And I think Gathering Storm in general kind of sucks in solo queue at the moment. So I much prefer the Scorch, but if you do want Gathering Storm, you can. And then, of course, Inspiration, once again, we'll just be going the Minion demat for the wave clear. It's really, really nice. Just use one on each creep, as I said before. Otherwise, I guess you could take, like, Perfect Timing or something instead, but I really do think this is the best, and the Cosmic is super, super valuable. There is one more rune page which I'll show you, which is the Spellbook page. So this is something that I don't use very often, but you can use this if you want to be extremely safe. So if you're against an assassin and you either don't feel confident or you just want to completely ruin their day, you think that if this assassin doesn't carry the game, that they can't win, you can go ultra defensive with something like this. So what you would do is you would just take Spellbook Resolve. You could go Spellbook Sorcery and then you go like Mana Flow Transcendence or Mana Flow Scorch, but this is going to make you extremely tanky, and it's going to give you so many ways to deal with the assassin, right? Like you can swap to Combat Summoners at 6. You can even take a Combat Summoner if you want. It allows you easy access to Zhonya, low cooldown on your summon. So this is kind of the ultimate anti-assassin page. A lot of the time, though, you don't need this because Lissandra already deals with assassins so well. But again, maybe if you're a bit newer to Lissandra, or you just think, again, if this assassin doesn't carry the game, you know you're going to win, then you probably want to look for this. If you're confused on how to use Spellbook, I do have a video on it on my channel. If you just search Shok Spellbook, I'm sure it'll come up, and that should tell you everything you need to know. But yeah, so there are reasons to use most of the pages. I think that, again, if you're new to Lissandra, take the Electrocute page. Otherwise, probably look for one of the Sorcery pages, and maybe you could try First Strike or Spellbook if you feel like it. Moving on to Lissandra's items. So for starting items, at the moment, as of 13.20, you should just start D-Ring and 2 potions every game. I think after the buff, D-Ring is quite a lot superior to Corrupting Pot. You used to go Corrupting Pot in matchups where you're going to trade very heavily, but I honestly think now going D-Ring and 2 pots and looking for refillable on one of your early bases is the better way to go. So speaking of early bases, for your early buys, there's a few different things you can get. I would recommend trying to fit in a refillable if you can, because you are going to trade a fair amount of HP on this champ, and having extra sustain, especially in bad matchups, is going to make a big difference. Other things you can consider for cheap options, I mean, boots allow you to move up and down the river a lot better, and they're also very good for skill shot heavy matchups. Dark Seal is the best AP item in the game and has been for a while. If you can keep this stacked, it does, it's ridiculously efficient. It's even gold efficient on 0 stack, so don't be worried too much about buying a Dark Seal and then not being able to snowball. It's only Magi's that sucks, with 0 stacks. Dark Seal is actually fine with 0 stacks, so try and look for this. After that, you kind of have to itemize a little bit depending on the matchup. So if you're against, some kind of assassin champ, you might find that just buying a Ruby and building it into your, your Kindle Gem or your Everfrost or whatever you're going to build into with it, can be pretty nice for helping neutralize. If you do have enough gold for it, though, I probably would buy a chapter most of the time. It helps with your wave clear a lot, and obviously if you have mana on this champ, it's pretty easy to deal with pretty much anything because you have, a dash and self-peel and your ults and stuff like that. The only other thing you might consider early on is the Catalyst instead of the chapter. This will be, of course, if you're rushing Rod of Ages, which we'll talk about. I don't think it's as good, but yeah, I mean, it's worth putting on here. I will say that Catalyst is probably the best neutralizing item, but a lot of the time Lissandra can win her lane if she's going for something like chapter instead. So I don't like it as much, but it does have some cases. Boot options then, there are really only 3 of them, which are CDR, the Sork Shoes, and the Merc Treads. So the CDR boots are pretty nice on Lissandra. This is because Lissandra does very well, obviously, with a lot of CDR. It's also quite good for the Summoner spell Haste. Like, you can flash more often, you can TP more often, which is all really, really nice. It's also pretty cheap, so if you base with Awkward Gold, you can look for that. Sork shoots are very good as well, so Liss does quite a lot of AoE damage, and especially if you're the solo AP or you don't think they're going to build a lot of MR, Sorks can be pretty valuable. Honestly, I would say whichever one of these you default to is probably fine, but just, yeah, again, bear in mind that if you have too much AP on the team, it is going to be better to go CDR boots because they're going to buy magic resist, which obviously counters your flat pen. Merc Treads are really good in some matchups, so the APCC matchups, or if they have double AP mid jungle, or if they just have a lot of CC on your team. So examples would be, you know, laning against Syndra, LeBlanc, Zoe. You really want Merc Treads in these sorts of matchups. Or if they have, you know, double AP mid jungle with some CC. Worth noting is if you don't need the tenacity and you just need the MR, it's worth just buying the null magic because it's only 450 and you get the same amount of magic resist. So yeah, it's basically good for CC heavy comps, and you definitely shouldn't greed this too hard on Lissandra because you are going to be in the middle of the enemy team a lot. So having the tenacity can make the difference between getting your combo off or not. You know, like on a lot of like longer range champs, you can get away with just going one of these all the time. But I think you should seriously consider these on Lissandra, and yeah, don't get too greedy with it. So the most standard build is to pick up Everfrost as your mythic and your tier 2 boots along with it. After that, you get a situational second item. Zhonya's again should probably be your default. From then on, you just look to pick up Rabadons and Void third and fourth, depending on, you know, do you need a magic pen or do you just need AP? Kind of depends. Like if they don't have any MR, then you can just go Rabadons. You can skip Void. You know, if they don't build any MR whatsoever, you can just fit in another situational item instead, but I feel like it's pretty rare. And then finally, it's normally good to just cap the build off with another defensive item. Worth noting though, that a lot of these items are situational. So like your mythic, your second item, and your last item. And of course, like again, skipping Void, which I will come to at the end. But yeah, like you can copy this build and it's going to be good in 99% of the games. So for alternative mythics, we do actually have a lot of them here. And I'll first talk about Liandry's and Ludens. So if you want, you can opt for more damage on Lissandra. If you're, again, solo AP, or if you don't really need the utility from Everfrost, or if you feel like you can get away with being a little less tanky, then you can look for one of these. I mean, both these mythics do more damage. Liandry's very, very good against tanky or higher HP comps. Ludens, you know, you can go something like Ludens Sork Shadow Flame as your build, so Ludens Sork Shadow Flame. That will be really, really good if you're solo AP and they're all squishy or something like that. And Lissandra does do a lot of damage. Now, if you're going that build, you do need to be a little bit careful, like, you know, kind of choose your moments in team fights a bit better. Make sure you don't go in too early, and you're kind of looking more to deal damage with your passive instead. But honestly, they're very viable. Like, I think both of these are very good. I probably don't default to them, but I still build them every now and then. Rod of Ages, so I don't really like Rod of Ages on Lissandra, but it is quite good on her. So the thing is, it makes you really tanky. The thing I don't really like about it, though, is the build path is really made for neutralizing, which you think, you know, Lissandra is kind of a neutralizer, so it makes sense. But a lot of the time, you can impact the map a lot by pushing and moving with your Lost Chapter. There's not that many champs that can match the wave clear efficiency of Lissandra early. So going Catalyst, yes, it'll make sure you can't die, but it also means you're not going to have as much impact early. And I also think that the Everfrost active is much better than anything Rod of Ages is giving you. So if you really wanted to play Ultra Scaling, if you wanted to play, like, I guess the simplest build possible, you could go Rod of Ages. But I honestly think Everfrost is kind of just a better version, and I can't really think of a time at the moment where I would go Rod of Ages instead of Everfrost. So my thoughts on it anyway. Protobelt, I know some people really like Protobelt on Lissandra, mainly because it is giving pen and it allows you to kind of dash forward and get your ult on people. Honestly, I think it kind of sucks. I don't really like the build path. Like, yes, you get a lot of burst, but you don't really, even though you get AP, you don't have the mana to actually attack the wave. And most of the time, you're not looking to solo kill your opponent. You're looking to kind of push and move with your jungler. So I don't like Protobelt on Lissandra, but I know some people swear by it, so you can at least think about it. Now, situational items, these first four here, so Banshees, Shadow Flame, Zhonya's, and Cosmic, these are all your options for second item and last item. So when you get to this point here, you have to choose, you know, which item do we want. And the reason that second item is situational and third item is generally not, is because by the time you get to your third item, normally you either need Void for the magic, you know, for the percent magic pen, or you will need Rabadons because you just have a lot of AP at this point, right? But second item is definitely up for debate. So Shadow Flame is your highest damage. It can be difficult, I think, to play Lissandra without Banshees or Zhonya's if you're, you know, newer to her. But honestly, it is a good item on her, so I do go for it sometimes. Banshees and Zhonya, so these are your go-to defensive items. On the surface, it's pretty simple. You know, you go Banshees versus AP teams, you go Zhonya's versus AD teams, but you got to think about it a bit more than that. So the Zhonya's active is definitely better than the Banshee's shield. You can go in, you can buy a lot of time, especially with your Zhonya's ult combo, so that gets a lot of value. But Zhonya's is more expensive, and the Zhonya's armor is not as valuable as you'd think, because stuff like LDR and Cyrilda's are a lot better than Void stuff. So A lot of the time, I will buy Banshees just for the stats. I'm buying it for the magic resist, I'm buying it to make it difficult for my opponent to go Rabadon's third and kind of force them into Void. Whereas I only really buy Zhonya's second when I want the active. I'm not thinking too much about the armor unless they're like literally full AD. So if that's a bit too complex, like don't worry about it too much. Again, you can kind of get away with just going again Banshee versus AP teams, Zhonya versus AD teams, but the optimization is sometimes Zhonya's is not that good against AD teams, and mainly you're buying Banshee for the stats, not for the active. So just kind of keep that in mind. Cosmic can be a good second item, so if you're going for a full CDR build, something like Liandry, CDR boost, and Cosmic, this is very, very good against tankier teams, and you're going to have low cooldowns the entire time. So yeah, it's something I don't go for very often, but honestly, it's a pretty solid choice. So if you did want to try that as your second item, you definitely can. And of course, remember that all these items can be bought last item instead. So after you pick up your Rabadons and Void, if you, like, let's say you went Zhonya's second, you can then think about, okay, do I want a Cosmic or a Banshee or a Shadow Flame as this last item here? Of course, then moving on to Void and Rabadon, so I've talked about these a bit, but Void is really good if the enemy team is stacking a lot of MR. The percent magic pen goes a really long way. Otherwise, Rabadon's is going to be more damage, and pretty much third item onwards, Rabadon's is always the most damage unless they have a lot of percent magic pens. So if you can get a Rabadon's in your build at some point, that should be ideal. Like, it's really, really important that you have that in there. Now, you can go extra utility and skip it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Again, Lissandra actually does do a lot of damage if you build properly. And finally, just a stopwatch on its own. So even if you're going something like, let's say you're going Shadow Flame second, if you know there's a really important fight coming up, whether it's on your second item or maybe you're on 3.5 items, you can just buy a stopwatch at some point, because the one-time use can turn a team fight around. And, you know, if you end up winning a team fight, getting a dragon and getting a baron, like the 750 gold investment is definitely worth it. So I would say I don't do this that often, but every now and then I find myself, you know, with nothing else really to buy, an important fight coming up, and I decide to buy the stopwatch. So I think that's pretty much everything. Again, if you want the cookie cutter build, you can just go like this, but there is a little bit of optimization if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of it. But I think Lissandra is honestly less itemization reliant than other champions, so you'll be fine with this if you don't want to overthink it. Sums on Lissandra are ultra straightforward. I would just recommend taking Flash TP in 99% of games. The only other sums you might consider is you can take Flash Ignite in some melee matchups if you think you can kill them early, so something like Sylas. I would still go Flash TP in this matchup, but if you want to try Ignite, you can. Other than that, if you take Spellbook, you can look for a combat sum earlier. You know, you can go for something like Flash Exhaust or Flash Heal, maybe, Flash Ghost. I don't know. I would honestly say, even with Spellbook, I would still go Flash TP. There are options if you don't think you used TP very well. You could look to take some sort of combat summoner, but Flash TP is so broken on Lissandra because obviously there's a lot you can do with Flash aggressively and defensively, and Lissandra has really good TP flanks, and also she's somewhat weak in lane early game, so having the TP to kind of make up for that is really, really valuable. Now we're just going to real quick go through Lissandra's abilities, talk about what they do and which order to max them. So first off is the passive. Now the nice thing about the passive is it's extremely broken and you don't have to interact with it at all. So basically the way this works is when champs die near you, they become these little zombies that chase around people, and they slow people that are near them. After 4 seconds they blow up and deal a lot of damage. So good news is, as I said, you don't need to do anything, and it's an extremely broken passive. So I'm sure if you've played versus Lissandra, you would have seen this before, or if not, you'll see it in the team fight section. But yeah, you don't need to think about it at all. So that's a great start. Moving on then to the Q. So this is a line skill shot. You can see it's fairly long range like this, and what it does is it deals damage, slows the target, and it also deals damage and slows the targets behind them. So what this is mostly used for is wave clear. You know, you see you kind of be walking up to the melee creeps, and then you'll hit the back line like this. But it also can be useful in team fights, right? Like the more people you can hit with this, the better. It can also be used to splash damage onto someone in lane. So if someone's like kind of too far back for you to hit them with a Q, you can, you know, splash a little bit of damage off the front creep here. So we'll talk about it a bit more in the combo section, but it has a lot of uses, especially for the lane. Anyway, it's pretty simple to use. Next is the W. This is basically just an AoE around you that roots targets, and the rank or the duration does go up with level, and it deals damage. So, I mean, the way to use this pretty much is either you can root someone off you and then, you know, walk away, or if you're in the middle of the enemy team, you can look to just like root a bunch of people at once, which is really, really nice. Next is the E. So the E actually does have quite a lot of skill to it. So it puts forward this claw that does deal damage, and you can choose to recast it or not at any point, right? So if I just use it here, you've got until the end to reactivate it. And it's pretty generous. Like, even when it reaches the end, you still have a moment to reactivate it. Now, importantly, it does do damage still. So, like, I don't know, if you did want to maximize the damage in your combo, you would want to hit people with your E. But generally, the way you're going to use this is for engaging or just for, setting up ganks or something like that. So you can tap E really early and go partway through. You can also tap really late if you want to go to the end. So you can see, even if I let this pretty much expire, you can still take it basically at the end. It's quite generous, as I said, and of course you can use this to go over walls and stuff like that, and I'll show you some cool tips and tricks that you can do with it when we get to the combo section. Lastly, we have Lissandra's ultimate. So there's two ways to use this. You can either use it on an enemy or you can use it on yourself. So if you use it on an enemy, basically it stuns them and deals AoE damage around them. So you can see that these people got hit by it. It also does AoE damage around them or around you if you use it on yourself. So you can cast it on yourself in the middle of a team fight and it still does damage. So basically the choice you're making is if you ult yourself, well obviously it makes it so you can't be attacked, right? Like if you ult, obviously you're going to be immune to any sorts of attacks and it heals you. So if you're low health, it can be really, really valuable because it does heal more based on missing HP. So yeah, if you're in the middle of the enemy team, normally you're going to be looking to ult yourself. But if you're just looking to lock down a carry or set up a gank, normally it is going to be better to ult a target rather than yourself. So this does have quite a bit of skill to it, honestly, but yeah, like to be honest, the general rule is just like if you're in the middle of the enemy team, you should probably ult yourself. Otherwise, if you're, kind of out, you're peeling back or something like that, just look to ult someone instead. So for which order to max them in, generally you just max Q, then W, then E, and put a point in ult whenever you can. There is a couple things you can do in lane, so sometimes people will go QEQ or QWQ. So like QWQ is really, really good for trading because you get a lot of damage and you also get the self-peel. That does make you vulnerable though, because you won't have E to get away from ganks. Now, if you are a bit worried about getting ganked, but you're not worried about getting dived on, you can go QEQ. So that gives you a lot of wave clear on the wave very early, while also still maintaining that little bit of disengage. You can, of course, just do QWE or QEW, those are all fine, but a lot of the time, 2 points in Q is better because it's not often in matchups that you can use both your E and your W early. So normally you choose one or the other, but you can put a point in each, of course, if you want. We'll start our combo section off with just some things for the laning phase. So obviously, as I said before, mainly the way you're going to trade in lane is just by poking your opponent with Q through the creeps or something like that. Now, if your opponent is too far up or they've wasted cooldowns or whatever, you can look to get aggressive and E onto them. So the way that trade will normally look is you're going to look for something like an E like this and then like a WQ auto or something like that. Just get a lot of damage, and then if you have phase rush, you can either chase them down or disengage. If you don't have phase rush, you probably want to disengage at that point because you're going to take some damage on the way out. Now, something that you do need to consider when you go for this is if they do have cooldowns up and they have something that they can combo you with or hit you with when you go in, you want to be kind of careful with the way you use your E. So let's say we're laning against like a Zoe or a Syndra or a LeBlanc, something that has an ability that they're kind of waiting for us to take this E. If that's the case and they have that cooldown up, there's a few things you can do. One, you can either tap E earlier or like earlier than they expect and then kind of like hit them with a max range W. So I guess you want to be like somewhere like here. You have to be quite precise with this, obviously. You don't want to be too far out of range that you can't actually do anything to them. Sometimes, if let's say you want to do that, right? You could take it earlier, hit them with the Q first, and then you'll get the slow on them, and then you can hit the W, right? So you could do it like that. Another way is to hold the E for a really long time. So as I said, go in, but wait till it's literally last second and they might have already used their ability by that point. Another way to do it is actually just like not to take the E, right? So like there's a couple ways you can do this, I guess. You can let's say you're Eing this way, you can just start walking like this and not take the E if you're close enough to them. And that might mean that they use more cooldowns. The thing you have to be careful of though is obviously this is like a long cooldown and it's like fairly costly. So unless you're getting something really big for it, it's probably not worth it. So that's basically like how you're going to be trading and looking to punish in lane. If you're level 6, there's a couple other ways we can do this, of course. So like if we want to do the same combo, go in, you generally want to use your W before using your ult, just because that might mean you get a second cast of W later. So you can look for something like this. And it's very important on Lissandra, no matter what combo you do, that you try and like maximize your CC chain. So you see when I W him, he's got that like rooted bar there. So you want to be paying attention to that and try like layer the CC. So I'd look at this and then I'd try ult like basically as it's expiring. You do have to be careful because this obviously is affected by tenacity, and a lot of people have tenacity in runes these days. And you also need to be careful because if you mess it up and they have a slight window to flash, they'll be able to get out. So better to be safe than sorry. Cast it just a little bit earlier so make sure it layers properly. In some matchups, you will want to cast this R on yourself instead. So again, like let's say we're going in versus like a Syndra or something like that. It might be better to kind of like chase them down like this, and then when they ult you, that's when you can ult, and it'll just eat all their damage. Very good versus champs like Syndra or champs like Zed. If you're setting up a gank though, you probably do want to ult them instead. But yeah, so that's pretty much everything for the laning phase. I mean, the only other thing you need to know really is flash combos, but I'll get to that, you know, kind of when we do those. So yeah, that'll help you mostly for the laning phase. Next, I want to talk about just kind of ways to use your E. So as I said before, there's lots of stuff you can do with your E, like baiting. You know, like as I said here, you don't have to take it, and sometimes this will get them to waste cooldowns. This can be very, very useful in team fights. Like a lot of the time, I will just cast my E, and a bunch of stuff will be used, or they'll get zoned off it, right? They'll be like walking backwards, and that buys your team space. You can also, you know, move in one direction while Eing in the other. Like let's say you're getting ganked mid, right? Maybe they're ganking you from bot side. You can E away while walking top, and then you can either take this, or you can just walk out. So that gives you a lot of options, and that's very important to be able to do that. Another thing to do with E is you can kind of hide your E in walls, and you can use your E to kind of get over walls that perhaps you shouldn't be able to. So first off, it's like the hiding the E in the wall, right? So let's say you're ganking bot lane. I'll just place the ward here. There's a big difference between if you E here, it's very, very obvious to bot lane that you're ganking them, right? If you E a bit further back, it's a bit harder to see, right? And the thing is, because it'll put you on this side of the wall, you can actually E in some pretty weird ways. Like if I cast my E to like here, for example, it still puts me on this side of the wall. Or, you know, I'm pretty sure if I cast my E to here, it still puts me on this side of the wall. So you can kind of like hide your E, and this can be really, really good in team fights because people don't have the time to see everything, right? So if you can ever find these little windows where you're looking over walls or something like that, it can be really, really difficult for people to spot you in team fights. And again, you can get a lot more distance than you might realize, which is really, really nice. As for flash combos, you know, the kind of simple one is like if we're just like looking to engage, let's say there's a few people here, we might want to do something like this where we like E, flash W, and then we ult ourselves, or we could look to ult someone. I probably wouldn't ult someone else though, because you're all going to get turned on there. And so yeah, you can do that. Obviously, you can just look for a regular flash R, like that works fine. You can look for a regular flash W, like it doesn't have to be synergized with E. I believe you can Q flash. Yeah, you can. So you can Q flash if you need to. I don't really think I've ever done this, maybe. I'm sure I've done it like once or twice, but yeah, as you can see, it's not that important. The only other combo I can really think of that might be kind of nice, it's not really a combo, but it's more just something you can use, is the Zhonya's ult combo. So a really good way, especially as you get like more CDR and more points in your abilities, is you can get off a couple rotations. Like let's say we're in a team fight, right? We go in, I'm just going to do this slowly so you guys see. So let's say we go in, we E, and then maybe we like WQ, right? And then we ult. And then what we're going to do is when this ult expires, we can Zhonya. And by this point, our W will probably be back up. So we can W, and then maybe we can E out. Probably not. Otherwise, we might have to flash out or something like that. But even if you don't get kills, or even if nothing ends up happening, it's really, really hard for the enemy team to do anything while you're just like CCing them and like kind of just wasting their time for like a really long time, right? Like it makes it very difficult for them to walk past you, because if they do, like you'll be behind them. So a lot of the time it can just be worth, you know, essentially just buying time for the rest of your team to win in the team fight. And if you ever have Zhonya's, it is worth looking for that. Again, try use the cooldowns before you go into your R and Zhonya's, so they're cooling down while they're in there. But at the same time, like, don't go in and get instantly one shot, right? Like, if you don't have time to get off WQ, just ult yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like nice, it's extra damage, it's extra CC, but don't die for it for sure. Of course, this does work with Everfrost as well. So with any combo that you do on Lissandra, you can weave Everfrost into it. You know, like, let's say we're going like this. We might look to start with Everfrost, or we can start with W. It really depends kind of what you're looking for. So if they're a bit out of your range, you might want to Everfrost to slow them, so you can catch up to them. But a lot of the time, like if you really want just the max CC, you know, if you can get in the middle of them, let's try to do a full combo with a flash. So like, let's say we do something like this. We E, flash W, maybe we Everfrost and Q, and then we ult, and then after all this, we'll finally Zhonya. And they've just been CC'd forever. You can see our W is about to be up. We W again. And if you died at this point, I'd say, honestly, you've done your job. So Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the Lissandra combos. As you can see, there's nothing like really super complex in terms of execution. It's more just like the decision making of how you want to use them. And I guess, again, to make it easy, I think I've said this before, but if you're in the middle of the enemy team, most likely you're wanting to be ulting yourself. Otherwise, if you've got someone isolated, like let's say you're peeling someone off your AD carry, you probably just want to ult them, and then you can look to CC chain in whichever way you like, just to make sure that they can't move. I'm going to show you a couple of Lissandra lanes and kind of walk you through what I'm thinking and just kind of how to play it. I will say that I also have a couple other Lissandra lanes in my Road to Rank 1 series, so if you want to go check that out, you can. But you'll still learn everything you need to know here. So first off, this is Lissandra versus Akali, a matchup that is quite good for Lissandra. Now, I will say that I have W start because we had a level 1 invade thing. Normally, you would want to start Q in this matchup. But against most melees, the way Lissandra wants to play early is you normally want a 3-wave crash. So you kind of see here that I want the wave pushing to her, but I don't want to push it so fast it's just going to crash under tower. So I will look to order her when I get the opportunity. You know, if she walks up too far, as you can see here, I will go for orders when I can. She does have D-Shield second window, which is going to make it pretty tough to get anything done, but that's just the way mid lane goes. Most important thing really is just the wave control. So I have gone area as well for extra damage, but you could go phase rush here and it would be fine if you wanted. Either of them I think are good. So you can see here that the wave is pushing. This means that I have the level 2 advantage. It means I have the creep advantage, and overall it just makes the lane harder for her. And so you're going to want to continue to do this. Just, you know, whenever she walks up, look for that harass with Q, look for that harass with autos. And then when this third wave comes, this is the one you're going to look to crash. Now, something you can think about doing here, and you have a choice, is if you want to really heavily harass your opponent under tower, normally you will want to come ward before you push this wave. Because what you don't want, if you want to harass your opponent, you don't want to crash the wave under tower and then be forced to ward because they will just be clearing the wave. But you also don't really want to be under their tower with no ward, right? So I would recommend, if you do want to harass, just come and ward on the second wave. Anywhere should be fine as long as it's not too shallow. Like, I wouldn't recommend warding in this side lane bush here. Like, even just warding a tiny bit outside of the bush, you can see like what I do here provides you with a lot more vision. So I like that. And then we really want to crash this wave. So the reason we want to crash this wave is we don't want her to freeze outside tower. We don't want her to hit level 3 first because that would give her a really good winner to trade on us. So yeah, basically you would normally have a choice when you crash this wave around what do you want to do. So the typical thing, especially if you're versus a range champ, is that you look to just get deep vision because it's quite hard to harass range champs on the tower. But against Akali, like, she can't do anything to me early, so I'm just going to look to punish her on the tower, which pretty much just looks like hitting her. Now, another choice you have to make is, and this is for all like versus melee matchups, is do you want to keep pushing or do you want to have it come back to you? So again, I have a lot of wave control guides, so if this doesn't make sense to you, I'd recommend checking those out. But basically, if you let this wave come to you, you'll be safer, Akali won't be able to go on you, and you'll be able to set up ganks. If you continue pushing, it means you can continue pressuring Akali in the 1v1. I think here I chose to continue pushing because I wasn't too worried. You can see here that I'm just, you know, dematting the cannon. I'm pushing the wave really early, and this just pins her to the tower. But if you, again, like if you felt like you wanted to set up ganks, if you're really scared of the jungler, you could look to do that. Here, I'm just not really scared, right? It's like, I think it's Akali Lee Sin. So Akali has no gank setup. Lee also like brings damage, but doesn't have gank setup of his own. Like Lee Akali is not really a good combo. You'd much prefer something like, well, like Lee Lissandra. And then I have a Nidalee, so Nidalee's not particularly good at ganking. So basically, I'm just choosing to prioritize the 1v1. I just continue pushing, continue harassing, and all this. So pretty much just rinse, repeat. Here we were kind of lucky because we managed to get this dive off on Akali. This is nice, but if this doesn't happen, it's fine. Like basically what you're looking for is just to pick up the CS lead. I managed to get a kill. That's great. But we're in a really good spot. So when you come back to lane, you know, you're about to hit level 6. Once again, you have a few choices, which is, do you want to pressure your opponent in the 1v1? Are you looking to kind of push and move around the map? So generally, if you can, you're going to want to push and move around the map. But that doesn't mean that you move if there's nothing to do. So I'll kind of show you here that I was ahead. So first off, I bought a chapter. You could buy Kindle Gem if you were scared of dying to Akali or something like that, but I was ahead. Now, every time I push this wave into a tower, right, and this is extremely important if you play Lissandra, you need to know how to use your priority. So I'll push this wave, come up to the tower. You gotta kind of look at the map and think, like, what can I do? So the first thing is, like, can I ward? Well, I don't have any wards, so I can't do that, right? Second thing, could I base? Probably no point. Like, I'm full HP, full mana, and I don't have much gold. So we're not basing, we're not warding. Could we roam? Maybe we could go bot side, but I don't know. Braum doesn't really have any gank setup, and Nidalee's on the top side, so it doesn't, I don't know. Bot lane doesn't look very gankable to me. We could go top, but we don't see their top laner there. So basically, it's like right now, we just have nothing to do except go mid. So the thing you need to remember, especially if you're playing a push and move champ like Lissandra, is anytime you crash a wave under your opponent's tower, if you don't harass them, they collect this wave for free. Now, if you can get a good roam off, it's definitely worth roaming, right? But if you have nothing to do, you shouldn't just run up and down the river for no reason. Sometimes you can just hide in the fog of war, but a lot of the time it won't actually be as pressuring because people in solo queue just don't really actually respect. But you can kind of see here, basically I'm just like pushing each wave. After every wave I push in, I kind of reevaluate, can I roam? If I can, I'll look for something. If I can't, then I just continue pushing. So here, the reason I'm looking bot is Nidalee is on bot side this time. So there's much, higher likelihood, I guess, of a play being successful. I can look bot, and also, especially once Lee shows up, I really want to walk down here. So you can see me coming bot. Now, unfortunately, the play didn't actually work out that well. I don't think I actually got any kills because I ended up getting here, slightly too late. This guy just cleansed. But honestly, like, I get out and I don't really lose anything for it. I was just able to happily disengage. So that's, like, kind of the general idea of how you're playing Lissandra mid, especially in the melee matchups. Obviously, you can get Prio in the range matchups too, and I'll show you a range matchup in a moment. But it's super, super important that you know what you're doing with your waves and you know how to use your priorities. So again, I have videos on these. I would recommend checking them out. It would help you with Lissandra a lot, but hopefully you kind of get the gist of it from what I've explained to you so far. So this VOD here is Lissandra versus Victor, which is actually a VOD from my 200 ping climb to Master on NA. So you can see I have 195 ping up there in the top right, which definitely makes this a little bit more difficult. But in most range matchups, you do actually lose the trade. So the way you win these matchups is by pushing and then kind of like not having to interact with your opponent too much, or by setting up ganks. Now you do have to be careful because whenever you use an ability on the wave, that's a pretty long cooldown that can be punished. Obviously, as you get more points in queue, it becomes less bad, but you can see here, without my Q, he was able to walk me off the lane. Now, normally, that's not too bad, but the thing with Lissandra is that eventually you kind of get to a point where you can just be like pushing and resetting. But just like, yeah, keep in mind basically that you are expecting to lose these lanes, and ideally you're just looking to kind of, harass the wave as much as you can, or poke your opponent through the wave and anything like that. Now, just because you lose a lane and lose a trade doesn't mean you should go down in CS. Like, again, it's pretty easy to CS on this champ. And a win condition that you can look for is that if your opponent doesn't have cleanse, they'll be very gankable. So if they don't have cleanse, they will probably have TP, in which case the 1v1's harder, but then you can just easily gank them, right? If they do have cleanse, then you have TP advantage over them at all times, and at some point you can just trade all your HP, you can TP back, and basically you'll just have a second health bar. So there's always some sort of win condition. In this case, this guy has neither. He actually has Ghost, which is probably the worst thing you could possibly take. But yeah, that basically allows me to just, play for attrition. I can afford to just take as much damage as I want. And also later on, I'll be able to let the wave come back to me and then set up a gank. So we kind of skip through here, skip to, a bit later in the lane. I've reset a couple times. So I'm getting close to 6. So now I'm probably thinking like, okay, my jungler's on the map. I have level 6. I probably don't want the wave to be too far up, right? Like I kind of want the wave in this more central position. Bel'Veth's pinging on the way. I can look to, go for the gank or something. If they play too respectful, I mean, that's fine, because obviously then, they're not looking for you. But you can see here, we get the flash immediately. We get the ghost immediately. I went for the flash follow-up. This guy, I think the Bel'Veth misplayed pretty heavily. Like, Bel'Veth didn't get his knock-up off at all. But this is basically what you're looking for, right? And obviously, like, just because this didn't go, the way it should, it was a bit unfortunate. Like, I think Bel'Veth probably, she used her knock-up here. I think she should just save it for after my combo. But that's kind of what we're thinking, right? We're just looking for these sorts of ganks. And then, obviously, when your opponent doesn't have sums, that means you can just re-gank later on. So later on, if I skim through this, when I have ult again and when I have Bel'Veth around mid again, it'll be really easy to look for some sort of gank. Can't remember if, I'm assuming we re-ganked eventually. Or you can even look, in skirmishes like this. Obviously, if your opponent doesn't have sums, it's going to make life more difficult for them. So the keys basically to playing the range versus range matchups for the most part is to just have the wave in a good spot. Well, early game is to kind of use your push advantage and use your sustain advantage. And then post 6 is to kind of keep the wave in a gankable position and set up for them. Any skirmishes you can get involved in generally will be better for you, because most mages, not all of them, but most of them are much better at kind of skirmishing. Or sorry, most of them are better at isolated 1v1, whereas Lissandra is much better at skirmishing. So if you get these sorts of fights, it's going to be really, really good for you. Admittedly, like, Victor is probably one of the worst matchups for Lissandra. Most mages are not this punishing. I think only, and I'll come to matchups pretty soon, but the only really bad ones are stuff like Cinder, Victor, Ori, you know, stuff like that. Outside of that, you can mostly play them probably in a similar way to you play the way I showed you to play the melee matchup, and you'll still come out on top. When it comes to team fighting on Lissandra, there's basically two decisions that you're going to make. And the first one, which we've talked about all throughout this video, is are you going to ult someone else or are you going to ult yourself? And that mainly depends on how many people are around you if you end up going in. The other decision you need to make is, do you want to play front to back or do you want to flank? So you can play front to back and kind of sit on your AD carry or sit behind them if your ADC is really strong and they have a team that has to dive into you. Or honestly, even if your ADC is not strong, if their team has to dive into you, then generally you want to play front to back, like if you verse a bunch of melees or a bunch of assassins or something like that. Now, if they have a pretty strong backline as well, like in this game, the Xayah is relatively strong, then if you can find a flank, you know, if you see the opportunity, then you probably will want to do this, because this way you can get into the fight and then you have options, right? You can still ult yourself or you can, you know, ult one of the carries if you find them. So in this game here, I managed to, I'll just go back a bit. So I'm initially pushing bot when this play ends up breaking out on mid lane, and I find that I have a pretty nice flank angle here. So I just come over and then I look for the E through the wall. Xayah's my main target here, so I just look to ult her, cleanse, and then kill her. Now, I didn't need to ult myself here because there's no one else really around me, right? I also have full HP and I have banshees, so I'm fine to be able to look to ult her. I believe my ult actually didn't go off on her though, so let's see. Because I think she altered it, right? Yeah, but you can see I was like willing to alter here. So, I mean, it was actually lucky that I didn't have to use it there. But anyway, I was looking to alter. And then from that point on, I mean, I can just play with the rest of the team and clean up this fight. They probably thought I didn't have ult, so then I was just able to ult the Akali. But that's kind of your textbook flank situation where you find a carry or a valuable target in the back line. Look to ult them if they're isolated. If they're not, probably just look to ult yourself and waste a bunch of their time. So in this example here, the enemy team has used a lot of cooldowns and a lot of tempo doing this dragon. And so they're pretty low and we want to look for a fight. Now, most of the time on Lissandra, you kind of want to be secondary engaged and you kind of want to follow up someone else just because it makes it a bit easier to guarantee your combo. And just because your engage is pretty telegraphed, right? Like it's pretty easy for people to back away from the claw if they see it. But if you find a flank or they don't really know you're there, or if they don't know that you know they're there, you can look to be the primary engage, which is what happens here. They don't know they're on a ward. So I'm pinging and looking for this, kind of pretending that I don't know they're there. And then once I get in range, I just immediately look to turn on them. And this time, because I'm in the middle of 3 people, I decide to ult myself because I know that I could get bursted down here, and instead I just get healed to full. And then we end up just cleaning up the fight from there. So that's an example of when you can kind of look for engage. And it's much easier, again, to look for engages when people are lacking HP or lacking cooldowns or whatever. Because here, right, like it could be a very different fight. Like my Draven's not even on the map. Could be a very different fight if they have everything here. But you can see like Nautilus was low. Kai'Sa was low. These two, I believe, I don't think Akali has ult. We'll see. Well, either way, she died immediately. I don't think she had it, but they were missing cooldowns, which made it a lot safer for me to look for that engage. Here's another teamfight example from the same game, and the reason I like this one is because this is a fight that I'm actually late to, and I don't really have the time to set up some sort of flank. So you can see I come pretty late. I just get in here immediately, and I'm kind of forced to play front to back. So I want to think about peeling my Kai'Sa, probably peeling my Draven, peeling the Akali off her. If I could get to Kai'Sa, it would be good, but it's hard, and also Kai'Sa might want to dive, so it's fine to just play front to back here. Now, initially, I use my E for zoning, and I kind of notice when I use this that it doesn't really feel like I can find anyone here. Like, I don't know, I kind of want to get Kai'Sa if possible, or Kha'Zix, but I'd have to get the spell shit off Kha'Zix first. He can just jump away. So instead, I just use my E to zone initially. Now, as soon as my E is gone, they immediately turn around. Now, here, if I got hooked, I would probably ult myself immediately, right? Because there's a lot of people around me. But you can see Nautilus is focused on like looking for someone else here. So instead, I'm actually safe on this side, and I decided to just ult the Kha'Zix. Now, this is pretty specific. I altered Kha'Zix because the Baron is so low. And I was thinking, as long as Kha'Zix doesn't get this Baron, you know, they're not going to get it. It probably is better normally just to ult yourself here. Sorry for the artifacting. I don't know why it does that every time I pause and unpause. But anyway, that's kind of like the gist of it. There, I was just like zoning 3 people and buying a lot of the space on the side. You can see that I kept Kha'Zix in that CC chain for a really long time, and that made sure that he couldn't get to Baron. So again, like if you don't find the opportunity to get a flank, you know, ideally you get one, but you can front to back fine on this chat. And the last teamfight example I want to show you here is an example of counter engage or secondary engage where the enemy team has clearly gone too far forward and overextended their cooldowns. So here we can see that they've used a lot already. Kha'Zix has used the flash and they're all getting collapsed on, so it's really easy for us to just set up here. Now, in this situation, I altered Jarvan. I think I probably should have altered myself here. Now, it doesn't matter because I have Zhonya's, but just to play it again. I think I probably should have altered myself here. It would have been a little safer, and I was a bit lucky that these guys were so weak that I didn't die. But again, like I have the Zhonya's, so I had that secondary effect if I really needed it. So in my opinion, Lissandra's matchups look something like this. Generally, the champs that are hard are ranged mages that are very strong in 1v1. Obviously, any matchup gets quite a lot easier if you do have a ganking jungler and ganking support. So generally, these matchups up here in hard, they're going to be hard pretty much no matter what. Obviously, if you receive ganks, it's made easier, but they're still going to be difficult. Champs in this tier, you're likely to find pretty difficult in the 1v1 still, but if you have like a roaming support and a ganking jungler, you might actually find some of them to be fairly easy, like if they get camped a lot, but again, in the 1v1, they can be quite hard. Coming down to the skill matchup here, we're starting to get towards champs that either kind of need to go in a bit closer to you so you can like CC them and stuff, or champs that just aren't as strong in the laning phase so you can get away with a bit more, or they're just really gankable, so it kind of depends. Some champs in here actually do fairly well into you 1v1, but you've kind of got like lots of windows to punish the game. So for example, champs like Silas, you can take Ignite and punish him really hard, like even if he does well with your ult, like there's ways to deal with him. Things like LeBlanc actually wins lane versus Lissandra, but in team fights it's impossible for her to play. Champs like Castellan and Corki definitely outscale Lissandra, but there's a lot you can get done in the early game. Worth noting is if you don't actually use your early game well, though, like these champs are basically just free scaling into you. So you do need to make sure you're kind of like moving around the map, doing the right thing, and making sure you're snowballing the game into your hands. As we get down here to the bottom, either we're getting assassins that have a very difficult time playing against you in team fights, or we have like short range champions that, again, like if at any point they overextend or try DPS in team fights, you can really make their life miserable. And most of these champs down here don't have the strongest laning phases either, which of course is Lissandra's weakness, if she even has one, because she is very overtuned at the moment. So again, this is kind of what I think. Keep in mind though, so much of a champ that has, you know, incredible 2v2 and 3v3 is going to be jungle and support dependent. You might find that some of the matchups down here aren't super easy if you have, you know, like a farming jungle and a 2v2 laning support, because naturally, like a lot of these champs, like Ryze is actually a good example. If Ryze is scared of ganks, he's very gankable. You know, it makes it difficult for him to push, and that's kind of what he needs to do. But if there's no threat onto Ryze, if there's no ganks that can come onto him, he will, you know, out CS you, he'll out push you, he'll out roam you. So it actually can be quite hard. And generally, I would recommend not to play Lissandra if your support and jungle are both like AFK champs, basically. It's pretty rare that that's the case, but if you have both of them, and if you've already picked Lissandra, well, then I guess you kind of have to deal with it. It is still a decent blind, but if like your team is already kind of committed to playing stuff that can't help it mid at all, then I probably wouldn't recommend it as highly. That is going to be it for my Lissandra guide. Hopefully you guys learned everything you need to know. If you still have questions left over after all that, please put them in the comment section below and I'll be happy to respond to them. As I said, I've been having a lot of success on Lissandra in solo queue and on the road to rank 1, so expect to see some more games of her. Of course, there's a lot of stuff in this video that I talked about that is related to other videos, so fundamental videos and, you know, other Lissandra games I've played. So just go and check those out as well if you want kind of some extra learning in that, but I think there was still everything you needed to know in this one. But anyway, guys, if you liked the video, go ahead, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.